You are listening to The Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley. And yes, on this show, we do read, we do talk, we do discuss. And in the 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock hour, as I await my guest to call in, I offer personal commentary of items and events and activities that's happened since the last time we were on the air, or I was on the air with you. And since I came back, actually before I left for China, I hadn't turned on the news. I wasn't, because it just got, like I said, I don't think I've watched the news consistently since the whole former FBI director James Comey hearings. Up to that point, I was watching it spotty off and on, and I was watching a little bit more consistently, but things just kept on going every day. It just got more and more ridiculous, and it's my understanding that hasn't changed. So it's just one event, one chaos, one ridiculous idea, notion, activity, revelation, whatever you want to call it, after another. So I just flat up stopped watching during the time whenever Comey was testifying. Then at the same time, that was like around the end of the school year, and then I was heading into my trip to China. Went over to China, didn't hear Donald Trump's name once, except for whenever I brought it up. And I asked the tour guide, and I think I shared this with you last week. I hate for people to do it to me whenever, because I'm an African American, they'll ask me a question and think I'm going to speak for every African American on the planet. And so I hate that done to me. So I prefaced my question to my tour guide up front. I said, Kathy, I said, I hate it when people do it to me. I do not speak for all African Americans, and I don't want you to try to speak for all Chinese people. I said, but talk to me a little bit about what was kind of like the reaction or the moods or the thoughts whenever Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. So she kind of looked at me kind of quizzically, and she kind of looked and said, well, it really didn't matter to us. Now, maybe to the politicians or those higher up in the offices, or maybe those folks it made a difference to, but for the everyday Chinese person, they could care less. And the reason I asked the question was because in the campaign prior to the election, Donald Trump was making so much noise about China, about how he was going to do this and the relationship here, and they don't do this and they're going to do that, and we're going to it was constant rhetoric about China, to the point where when the trip was already planned prior to the election, I told my wife, I said, depending on if Trump wins or not, that might impact our ability to go on the trip. And as it turns out, it didn't. But I was kind of curious just to see what were the thoughts of people around the world about this nonsense that we're going through here in the United States as a result of who we elected, or who was elected. I won't say we, because I didn't vote for him. I can be very clear on that. I did not vote for Donald Trump. He is what he is. I've known about Trump for years, and I can emphatically say, now I'm going to tell you who I did vote for, but I can tell you who I didn't vote for. I did not vote for Donald Trump. So when I say we, I'm talking the pejorative we, or I'm talking about the plural we, in terms of when I say who we've elected to be our president of the United States. Now, Hillary is what Hillary is. I wasn't a big Hillary fan either, but I can say I am sure we would not be going through what we're going through with Hillary. Now, we may be going through with something, but it would nowhere be to this degree of chaos, this degree of constant turnover, this degree of folks just, and I don't blame them, because I'm working my way up to what I want to talk about in terms of Sean Spicer. When I was watching the news consistently, I would watch Sean Spicer every day, twist and turn, know he was lying, trying to defend the nonsense of Donald Trump. Now, again, let me be very clear. The views and opinions heard here on those shows are solely those of the host and guests, and may or may not be reflected by the station owner, William Patterson University. I would watch Sean every day get up there, twist and turn, defend, and try to come up with some crazy reason or excuse to try to defend some of the stupid stuff that was going on out of the White House. I would watch the press ask him questions, him squirm, get nasty, give these little short, snippy answers, cut people off, insult people. All this in the name of trying to defend what really was undefendable or indefendable, however that word is, whether it's undefendable or indefendable, whatever. In other words, it cannot be defended or could not be defended, and Sean Spicer tried the best he could to defend it. Well, I happened to log on to Yahoo yesterday. I was going to my email, and what pops up on Yahoo other than Press Secretary Sean Spicer resigns? And a big, broad smile came across my face, because it was kind of like Me and some of my friends, we tease each other whenever we kind of predict something. We always kind of say, call me prophet. Well, in this particular instance, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one that could be called prophet on this, it was just a matter of time before Sean Spicer would either get fired or resign, as he did. And so when I opened up Yahoo to go to my email on yesterday, and I saw that in the headline that Sean Spicer resigns, a big grin came across my face. And the only thing I could say was, I don't blame him one bit. Not one iota. Not one scintilla. Not one half cent. Whatever the tiniest modicum, the tiniest mode, the tiniest speck of existence, I don't blame him. I really don't. I'm surprised he lasted this long. I really am. The fact that he could get up there knowing full-faced well that he was straight up lying. And you could see it in his face. You could see it in his body language. You could see it in his reactions. Straight up lying for what could not really be defended. He tried to defend it. I'm quite sure he had enough. And then that last move, whatever Trump did by hiring somebody who now Sean would report to, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And for what I didn't think I would ever be able to say is I actually applaud Sean for standing up, because I thought he was being really weasel-mealy. I know he was doing his job. First of all, I wouldn't have taken that job. There's no way in the world I'd be taking the job to be, I don't care what they paid me. I don't care the fame. I don't care the fortune. There's no way in the world I would take on the job of being the spokesperson or the press secretary for that shenanigans with Donald Trump. Ridiculous. Knowing him, because we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the 7 o'clock hour. Matter of fact, the person who wrote the foreword to the book we're going to be discussing is Michael D'Antonio. And Michael wrote a book called The Truth on Trump. Something along those lines. I believe that's the title of it. The Truth on Trump, something like that. And his book, out of all the books I've ever read about Donald Trump, was the most clear, the one that, to me, that really described Donald Trump. And I was even surprised Donald Trump let that go out into the market, because it does depict him accurately. Even he's in it. There's interviews in there between D'Antonio and Trump or what have you that pretty much confirms what D'Antonio's saying. So he writes the foreword, D'Antonio writes the foreword to News Chaser, The Rhetoric of Trump in Essays and Commentaries, the book we're going to be discussing in the 7 o'clock hour with Anne-Marie Waterman. But in Michael's book, everything that he described Trump to be, Trump is currently. And this is why you've heard me say this on this show before. I'm not necessarily mad at Donald Trump. I'm really not, because Donald Trump did not put on an act. The same Donald Trump you saw during the campaign was the same Donald Trump that existed. It was the same Donald Trump that ran Trump Tower and Trump casinos in Atlantic City and the golf course and everything else that he's ever done. It's the same Donald. He did not change. And yet, as a country, we sat there and put this man in office. And where I'm going with this is there's no way in the world I would have worked for him knowing how he is. That I do hold all those folks he's surrounded with accountable for. And Sean Spicer is one of them. But as we were talking about being enlightened and illuminated this morning, Sean Spicer finally became enlightened or illuminated enough to say, I'm out. That's what happened. He finally reached that point where, you know what, I can't do this nonsense anymore. So now Donald appoints this Anthony Scaramucci. I guess that looks like how you say it. I'm almost sure that's how you say it. Scaramucci. Scaramucci. Anthony Scaramucci, a financier, a New York financier, as his new communications director. And at that point, Spicer had had enough. Matter of fact, I'm going to go to the New York Times and I'll read, since this is the reading circle, I'll read from the article. Sean Spicer resigns as White House press secretary, New York Times, July 21st, 2017, by Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman. Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, resigned Friday after telling President Trump he vehemently disagreed with his appointment of Anthony Scaramucci, a New York financier, as his new communications director. After offering Mr. Scaramucci the job on Friday morning, Mr. Trump asked Mr. Spicer to stay on as press secretary, reporting to Mr. Scaramucci. But Mr. Spicer rejected the offer, expressing his belief that Mr. Scaramucci's hiring would add to the confusion and uncertainty already engulfing the White House, according to two people with direct knowledge of the exchange. See, he knew, because look how he describes it. Confusion and uncertainty already engulfing the White House. Mr. Spicer's top deputy, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, will serve as press secretary instead. The long-anticipated resignation rattled an administration already reeling from the most trying 2-week stretch of Mr. Trump's presidency. Now, that's amazing, because every week and every day, it just heightens. I thought he already had the most trying week or the most trying day or the most trying hour. But this now says from the most trying 2-week stretch of Mr. Trump's presidency. The president's health care effort foundered in the Senate last week, and next week promises no respite or respite. With his son Donald Trump Jr. and son-in-law Jared Kushner due to testify before Congress to questions about their contacts with Russia. If the moves amounted to a kind of organizational reset, it was not part of a pivot or grand design. The president, according to a dozen people familiar with the situation, meant to upgrade, not overhaul, his existing staff with the addition of a smooth-talking, Long Island-bred former hedge fund manager who is currently the senior vice president and chief strategy officer at the Export-Import Bank, which he joined just last month. His rapport with the president establishes a new power center in a building already bristling with rivalry. Despite the move, the immutable reality of the Trump White House remains the same. The president has no intention of changing his behavior. See, that's what I just told you. He has never changed his behavior. He merely believes his communication staff needs to defend him better. And Mr. Scaramucci even suggested his role would be to unshackle an already unfettered president. I think there's been at times a disconnect between the way we see the president and how much we love the president and the way some of you perhaps see the president. That's quote unquote. Mr. Scaramucci said during a news conference that kicked off with his announcement of Miss Sanders' new job. I certainly see the American people probably see the president the way I do. Wow, he's really smoking something, he added, contradicting a raft of recent polls showing Mr. Trump's approval rating below 40% nationally. Quote, but we want to get that message out there, unquote. In a statement on Friday night, Mr. Trump said, quote, Anthony is a person I have great respect for, unquote, and went on to describe the problem he hopes he will solve. Quote, we have accomplished so much, really, come on now, and we are being given credit for so little, unquote. Come on now, I threw the come on nows in there, but seriously, really, these folks are delusional. The good news is people get it, even if the media doesn't, quote unquote. That's the president. In a tweet, not surprised, late Friday, Mr. Trump also called Mr. Spicer, quote, a wonderful person who took tremendous abuse from the fake news media, but his future is bright. No, the truth is Sean Spicer took tremendous abuse from him, Donald Trump. That was mine. That wasn't the Times. Mr. Spicer's departure ends an excruciating saga, even for a highly factionalized White House riven with intrigue. He had hoped to last a year as press secretary. He quit after 6 months and a day. A former spokesman and strategist for the Republican National Committee, Mr. Spicer was a frequent target of the president's ire during the first few months of the administration. He attained a notoriety unusual for a presidential spokesman, his combative style spawning a caricature on Saturday Night Live. Mr. Trump expressed gratitude for Mr. Spicer's service in a statement and predicted that Mr. Spicer will succeed in the future. Quote, just look at his great television ratings, unquote, he said. Something's wrong with our president. I don't care what nobody say. The resignation is a blow to the embattled White House chief of staff, Reince Priebus, the former Republican National Committee chairman who brought Mr. Spicer into the West Wing despite skepticism from Mr. Trump, who initially questioned his loyalty. Mr. Scaramucci described his relationship with Mr. Priebus as a brotherly one where they, quote, rough each other up, unquote, and he called Mr. Priebus a good friend. During the transition, Mr. Trump had planned to appoint Mr. Scaramucci, 52, a Harvard Law School graduate, as the director of his Office of Public Liaison. But the offer was revoked at the request of Mr. Priebus, who had concerns about Mr. Scaramucci's overseas investments. An aide to Mr. Priebus said he had not blocked it, but merely tried to slow it down. Mr. Scaramucci's appointment came 2 months after the previous communication director, Mike Dupke, stepped down as the official in charge of Mr. Trump's messaging. The eventual appointment of Mr. Scaramucci was backed by the president's daughter, Ivanka, you think, Mr. Kushner, and the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, officials said. Mr. Kushner has grown increasingly critical of both Mr. Spicer and Mr. Priebus, whom he regards as a party establishment figures who operate out of self-interest. Oh, this is ridiculous. And I'm reading from the New York Times, he has also supported Mr. Trump's decision to supplant Marc E. Kasowitz as his lead attorney on matters pertaining to Russia, according to people familiar with the situation. Mr. Priebus and Stephen K. Bannon, the president's chief strategist, both strongly opposed the appointment of Mr. Scaramucci, in large part because he enjoys an easy banter and direct line to Mr. Trump, potentially threatening their positions, four people briefed on the discussion said. People close to both men insisted that they had not opposed the move by the president. Mr. Trump, aggravated by their opposition, dressed the pair down in a testy Oval Office exchange around the time he decided to offer Mr. Scaramucci, known in Trump circle as, quote, the mooch, unquote, the job. The president, according to three people with knowledge of the situation, said one of the reasons he hired Mr. Scaramucci was to cut down on anonymous leaking, and took a swipe at his two advisors. He asked them how the leaks were happening, according to a person familiar with the discussions, and called Mr. Spicer a, quote, good guy, unquote, who leaks only when told to by Mr. Priebus. Mr. Scaramucci met with Mr. Priebus on Friday, according to a West Wing official, and the two agreed to work together. When the pair joined Mr. Spicer in the second-floor office of the press secretary in a show of unity, applause could be heard echoing down the hallway. But senior officials, including Ms. Sanders, were said to be stunned by the sudden shuffle. While Ms. Sanders will preside at the daily briefing most days, Mr. Trump has told his advisor he is open to rotating new people into the slot. He is said to be especially high on Sebastian Gorka, a blustery foreign policy official who has been accused of having ties to far-right groups in Europe. During the transition, Mr. Priebus and Mr. Spicer stocked the press shop with their associates from the Republican National Committee, rankling Trump campaign loyalists who reminded the president that Mr. Priebus had suggested he drop out of the race after an Access Hollywood tape of Mr. Trump's comments about women became public. Mr. Priebus urged Mr. Trump to hire Mr. Spicer and another lieutenant, Katie Walsh, as deputy chief of staff. But when Ms. Walsh left the White House after a short time, when Mr. Kushner and other West Wing officials forced her out without Mr. Priebus objecting. Mr. Trump and Mr. Spicer did not have a close relationship, but the two spent hours together, and Mr. Trump said he felt sorry for the ridicule his press secretary received because of his portrayal on Saturday Night Live. He repeatedly told aides to convey to Mr. Spicer that he wanted him to stay. But by the 6-month mark of Mr. Trump's presidency, both men had had enough of each other. In recent weeks, Mr. Trump had told people that Mr. Spicer was no longer, quote, tough, unquote, one of the harshest insults he can level. And Mr. Spicer told friends he was tired of being blindsided by Mr. Trump and weary of Mr. Trump's constant criticism. He instituted the highly contentious practice of holding off-camera briefings, less so to snub reporters than to avoid Mr. Trump's critiques of his performance, according to one of Mr. Spicer's friends. The end came in operatic fashion, befitting Mr. Scaramucci's namesake, a stock character in Italian musical theater. As Mr. Scaramucci made his big entrance, Mr. Spicer exited quietly, disheartened that the president never quite appreciated his performance. And again, that is from the New York Times by Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman. The date was yesterday, July the 21st, 2017. You can pull it up online for yourself. So, as we can see, there was not too much bliss or happiness in paradise, and I don't think anybody's surprised by that. Again, I applaud Sean. It should have happened early. He said he thought he would last a year, didn't even make it into the 7th month. But you know what? I'm glad he finally stepped up, because I know he was being abused by Donald Trump, and I don't even have to be there. You could tell that. Just utter chaos, and not one thing that impacts the, quote, American people, unquote, has occurred positively. Because I've shared this with you on the show before. There is no one like a politician. I don't know what it is. It must be, they must take them to dictation training or dialect training whenever they take office, because no one can say the two words together, American people, like a politician. If you think I'm playing? Listen to next time you hear one of them give a press conference or a statement and they say the words American people together, listen to the diction. Listen to how it comes out of their mouth. The American people. Oh, we're here for the American people. We want to hear what the American people have to say. It's just something about those two words together for politicians to just come out very weird. Maybe because maybe that's the fake part. Maybe that's the part that's insincere. Maybe that's why it sounds so funny whenever they say the two words American people together, because there's some insincerity there. They are not doing not one thing for the American people, quote unquote. So I take for once, finally, somebody, and I don't know if he told the president what he told him or not, but it said, according to the New York Times, vehemently opposed. Let's see. Let me go back to that line again. Sean Spicer, the first line in the article. Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, resigned Friday after telling President Trump he vehemently disagreed with his appointment of Anthony Scaramucci. It's about time somebody vehemently disagreed with this nut. My goodness, that's part of the problem. No, and you've noticed, see, this Scaramucci is going to be another yes man. That's why he hired him. He's trying to get all these yes people. That's why he keeps talking about loyalty. When you hear them talking about loyalty, you can read between those lines. That means yes man. So now he's hired another yes man with this Scaramucci. Matter of fact, they know each other so well, he call him the Mooch. Now that's scary in and of itself. You hiring somebody that's nicknamed the Mooch. That ought to tell you something right there too. Well, so to shift gears a little bit, I'm going to move on into O.J. Simpson. I'll give you my thoughts about that. And I know the majority of you listening probably will not agree with my thoughts on O.J. Simpson, and I don't care. They've been my thoughts since the beginning, and they're still my thoughts. However, if O.J. has indeed served his time, he's been a model prisoner, and he has earned parole, and he comes out, good for him. But shame on him if he comes out here now and does something stupid to wind up back in there again. We'll talk a little bit more about that when I return.
Out and summer is here. Join me, Jeff Gamba, every Tuesday from 5 to 7 for your weekly dose of summer sounds. Jump in as we take a ride through time, spinning those feel-good tracks from the 60s,
town, summer in the city,
70s,
737 coming out of the sky,
80s, and those gems from today. So roll the windows down and crank that volume up, because the sun will be out every Tuesday and the airwaves will be filled with summer sounds.
My name is Diamonds. I am a radio DJ in North Jersey. I broadcast on the frequency of 88.7 FM. I will be on the air every Saturday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. when the sun is setting in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide music, I can provide entertainment. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please.
Club Melting Pot. Every Saturday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Only on WP 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio. You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
Yes, indeed you are. You are listening to The Reading Circle, and we're in the commentary portion right now. My guest will be joining me at 7 o'clock. That's Anne Marie Waterman, and she's out of Howard. That's Howard University. Some people call that the black people's Harvard. We don't get them mixed up, Howard and Harvard. In the African American community, Howard may be like the Harvard. I've been to both. I've done some studies at Harvard in Boston. Up in Massachusetts, I've studied there. And I visited the Howard campus and have many friends who graduated from Howard. Very well known and respected university. So Anne Marie Waterman will be joining me in the 7 o'clock hour. We're going to be talking about the book, News Chaser, The Rhetoric of Trump in Essays and Commentaries. And Michael D'Antonio wrote the foreword to the book. And I was mentioning him earlier about his book, The Truth About Trump, which is excellent. That's one of the best books I've ever read on Donald Trump. And I've read a couple of Trump's books on himself or what have you. But D'Antonio's book, to me, is the equivalent of the book, the book that was written on Ronald Reagan, The Role of a Lifetime. The author was Cannon. Cannon, for that book, The Role of a Lifetime, he captured the Reagan White House the same way that Michael D'Antonio captures Donald Trump. I mean, there's no way you can dispute the truth. And that's what these folks have done in those particular books. If you want to read a wonderful book on Ronald Reagan, giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly, read The Role of a Lifetime. You probably can hear my fingers. Lou Cannon, that's who it is. I knew his last name was Cannon. I wanted to make sure I got his first name straight. The Role of a Lifetime, the author is Lou Cannon. If you really want to get a feel for everything that was going on in the Reagan White House, read that one. If you want to get a really good feel for what's going on and why we were getting what we're getting, read Michael D'Antonio's book, The Truth About Trump. He wrote the foreword to News Chaser. Matter of fact, let's look a little bit. We'll do a little bit a head up before we get into the OJ thing, which I'm going to do and talk about for a few minutes before my guest joins me. President as cult leader. This is the foreword. No one should doubt that as much of the world struggled to understand the bizarre candidacy and then presidency of Donald Trump, that this attention, the mere fact that so many people were focused upon him, was the reward Trump has sought throughout his life. In other words, Trump is loving this. That's why if I were the press, if I were the media, since he's always calling fake news, there ought to come a blackout period where no one says his name. That would drive him silly. If not one media outlet mentioned Donald Trump. Now, I digressed from the forward, but this is what Michael is getting at. The mere fact that so many people were focused upon him was the reward Trump has sought throughout his life. As the ultimate man of his time, an era when a person's appearance in the media could make one rich, powerful, and ultimately real in the eyes of others, Trump has achieved his true goal. His name and likeness are known to the world, and it is up to us to grapple with the reality of his occupation of the world's most powerful office. Everything about Trump's ascendance defied what most people associate with the regular course of events. From the moment he arrived on the public stage in the 1970s, he was regarded as a paragon of ill will, a preening buffoon who insulted others, boasted relentlessly, and lied with abandon. This included adopting fake personas to claim that some of the world's most beautiful women were enamored of him. Although he said he was a real estate development, Trump's main construction was his own image, which was a confection made of gold-colored metal, advertising, and cosmetics. Citizens of his hometown, New York City, routinely dismissed him to pollsters, with roughly 65% offering consistently negative views on the man at every stage of his life. However, Trump understood that in a world of infinite options, support from 35% of the people would be more than enough to assure him of customers for his business and later an audience for his TV show. Throughout his life before the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump made racist and misogynistic statements and gleefully bullied both public figures and consumers who were duped by businesses like the so-called Trump University. These transgressions were revealed in the press, but for the most part, the facts eluded the great masses of people who would eventually vote for Trump to be president. By the time of the election, Trump was an attitude as much as a candidate. His stump speeches were performances devoted to the expression of ego, certainty, and defiance, and they thrilled his followers who found a kind of emotional release in hearing someone express disdain for those whom they disdained and promised to save them from the apocalypse that loomed on the horizon. Go ahead, D'Antonio. Even in this forward, he's nailed it once again. The idea that something is terribly wrong in America and that various forms of evil, including terrorism, global economic competition, and incompetence in Washington, threatened the nation, occupied the center of the portrait of the nation Trump painted for his followers. The appeal was deeply psychological one. It was a deeply psychological one. He touched on the universal human sense that each of us contain all that is good and evil in humanity, and our fear that the evil may be ascendant. The feeling underpins the messages of apocalypse that have been preached for as long as human beings have organized themselves into communities and became a strain in American political rhetoric in the 19th century. Trump absolved his supporters of responsibility for this evil by projecting it onto others, from President Obama to the world's Muslims, and assuring them that they are all, quote, good people, unquote. I'm not going to read any further, but I mean, he is on point. Now, interestingly enough, let me tell you how Michael and Denise met. Very good friend of mine, Denise Rose Shear, also known as Ayo Sakai. She contacted me and asked me to do a blurb, for the opening of the book. And so I said, sure. So I typed off a little ditty and sent it to her. And I'm looking for it now, because as soon as you open the book, it's a part of the praise for News Chaser. What I wrote was News Chaser, Rhetoric of Trump Essays and Commentaries, is a must-read, not since The Truth About Trump by Michael D'Antonio has a book more candidly explored the tactics and strategies used by Donald Trump to sway the American populace. All truth seekers are encouraged to read this book, as it is not fake news. At that point, Denise had not heard of Michael D'Antonio, but she looked him up and she contacted him, and the two of them got together, and he actually wound up writing the foreword for the book. And as I read those couple of pieces, is he on point? I for some reason, he's able to really get down to the nitty-gritty about Trump. And as he said, he sees the side that most people, and not only sees it, but reports it, that most people don't seem to care or see. Because exactly as I told you, if you were to read The Truth About Trump, every move that the president is making is moves that he made in every other position he's been in. And that's why the country is getting what it's getting. Now, biblically, I tell people all the time, go to 1 Samuel chapter 8. I believe that's what it is. I believe it's 1 Samuel chapter. I got to make sure I give it to you straight, because I want you to make sure you get it right. I am correct. All right, biblically, go to 1 Samuel chapter 8. Israel asks for a king. And read that chapter and parallel it. Look and see if it's almost not the same thing we're experiencing right now. You are getting what we asked for. The folks, they weren't satisfied with Obama. No. The success that Obama had, no, we cannot be satisfied with that. Obama is what Obama is. He was what he was, this, that, and the other. No, that wasn't enough. We want a king. Israel asked for a king. Read that chapter and see how God responds, and see if it's not the same way God is responding in 2017. All right, on to OJ. I told you, most of you who are in the listening audience who can hear my voice probably will not agree on my assessment of OJ, and I'm okay with that. But this is my personal belief on what happened 25, 30 years ago, whatever that was. Personally, in my heart of hearts, I honestly believe OJ killed them people. I really do. I believe he killed Nicole. I believe he killed Ron. I believe he did it. People would give me all kinds of reasons why he couldn't have done it. Like, nope. Oh, no, he was too old. He couldn't have run from that house to that house. OJ was in extremely good. OJ was only like 43 or 44 during that time period, somewhere around there. He was in his early 40s. He was still fit enough to run from that mansion to his mansion. He was fit enough to hop that fence. He was fit enough to do all of that. He really was. In my heart of hearts, I believe OJ, and I don't care whether you agree, disagree. I don't care. No one is going to sway me, just like I'm not going to sway you to believe that he didn't do it. You're not going to sway me to believe that he did. All right. Just like I can't persuade you to believe that he did do it, you're not going to persuade me to believe that he didn't. Let me put it that way. In my heart of hearts, I believe he killed that girl. I believe Goldman just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. OJ had to do away with him because he was now a witness. I believe he had probably just killed Nicole. And I don't think he necessarily did it on purpose. I don't think he went there. And again, this is Marc Medley view. This is not the radio station view. This is not anybody else's view. This is my view. I don't believe OJ went there to kill her, but I do believe they got into an argument and he snapped. And I can relate to that whole snap thing. Like when you go into that zone, there is strength unreal that comes upon you and you don't even realize it. You're just in that zone. That's why there's a whole show called Snapped on one of the internet stations or file stations or whatever it is. There's a whole show dedicated to people who snap. And they don't even know what they've done when they're in that snap moment. Honestly, that's what I believe happened to OJ. I believe OJ, him and that girl, because they had already had an argument earlier that day at that piano recital. If you look at the chronology, he and Nicole had already had words. He already was angry at something that happened during that piano recital for the kid. He goes over there. They get into it, and I honestly believe he snapped. OJ's big, OJ's strong, OJ's quick. He snapped. Before you knew it, that girl's neck was halfway off of her head. And at that point, that's when Ron Goldman comes up. He sees her back there, him standing back there with the knife or whatever. Them two get into a fight, and OJ does him. And then OJ runs. I honestly believe that's what happened. Now, at the same time, Johnny Cochran did a masterful job. When I tell you brilliant, Johnny Cochran played the system the way folks have been playing the system for years. Matter of fact, no time in the history of our legal system has the selection of jurors and the process been questioned, except when an African-American attorney with an African-American client played the system the way other folks have played the system and won. Now, all of a sudden, the rules might need to be changed. Right. Johnny Cochran was brilliant. I've read his books. I've read Marsha Clark's books. I've read Van Adder's books. I've read, I'm trying to think of Chris Darden's books. I've read all their books. And after reading everything, if you read between the line in Johnny Cochran's books, there is some instances in there where he pretty much says OJ did it. If you were to read the number of books that I've read by him about that case, there are instances in there where Cochran infers. And for the most part, if you read between the lines, he's telling you, yes, the man was guilty, but it was my job as his attorney to defend him. And defend him, he did. Set Chris Darden up, the whole glove thing. Cochran knew how Darden was going to respond. He tricked Darden into having OJ try on the glove. Now, Marsha Clark had already told Chris, do not have him put on that glove. Do not have him put those gloves on. Do not have him try, because she knew what was going to happen. But Johnny knew how to play Chris's buttons. Caught him off in the hallway one day and pretty much kind of said to him, yo, man, if you have any balls, you have him try the gloves on. Now, in Darden's mind, I don't think he was going to be chumped by Cochran. I want to make sure I'm calling his name right too, because it's been a little while, but that's I think I still have the names right. Yes, I wanted to make sure Chris Darden. That's right. I want to make sure I was calling his name right. So Chris was not going to be chumped by Cochran, and Cochran knew that. That's why he did and said what he did. That's why he manipulated that. That's why he set that up. So he literally sees him in the bathroom or the hallway and say, yo, Chris, yo, man, you really believe so much in your case? If you have any balls, have him try the gloves on. Mind you, he already knew the glove shrunk. Already knew that the gloves weren't going to fit. He already had that little, if it doesn't fit, it must have quit line already lined up, already ready. Sure enough, Darden takes the bait. And the rest is history. Now OJ gets out. This is the part I didn't get. He beat a case that in my mind he was guilty of, but he beat it. All right. He couldn't let well enough alone. He has to now go back and call himself reclaiming his items. So now he gets into armed robbery. Hold on, I think my guest is calling. Well, yes, indeed. When you heard me finishing or doing my commentary on OJ, I said the phone rang, and it was indeed my guest. And we will be joining her, or she'll be joining me in a couple of minutes as we move into the 7 o'clock hour. Those of you, I keep reminding you, but this is the deal. I don't want you to just now say, okay, the guests don't come on until 7 o'clock, so I won't tune in until 7. I still want you tuning in at 6 o'clock, because in the 6 o'clock time frame, you never know what you're going to get. It kind of depends on current events. And over the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of current events. And in the last couple of days, because I haven't even gone back a couple of weeks. I've just done the last couple of days with Sean Spicer retiring yesterday, or resigning rather. And I think a day or so before then, O.J. Simpson's parole came up, and he was actually parole. And I was sharing with you before the telephone rang my thoughts in terms of, personally, I believe he did it. But at the same time, brilliant attorney work by Johnny Cochran, who I had the opportunity to meet. When Johnny was alive, the couple of minutes that we met, he teased me about being an alpha. I teased him about being a kappa. We had a good time with the whole fraternal thing. And he was a funny guy. He had a funny sense of humor. So I could see him doing exactly what he said in his book, going up to Chris Darden and saying, yo, Chris, man, if you got any balls, you'd have him try the gloves on. And Darden fell for the bait, and the rest is history. Now, like I said right before, the phone rang, OJ got off with that. All he had to do was go live his life. That's all he had to do. And then he turns around, and this whole thing with the Heisman Trophy and some of his memorabilia and all this. I'm sitting here watching the CNN video clip of him and the guys that walk into the place to go get it together. I mean, they just look like, the Magnificent Seven or something. They walk in, gonna take back OJ's stuff. He gets caught with that, and now he winds up now serving this time. And if now, because as of October 1st, he will be once again a free man. If OJ, because OJ has to be about close to 70 or so, somewhere in that realm, 68, 69, 70, might even be over 70 by now. If between now and the time he passes away, he can't keep it together to keep himself out of jail, shame on him. Because there's no, first of all, I don't think he had any excuse to have to go back after that brilliant work, because Johnny Cochran passed away not too long after that. I met him, and maybe a year or so later, I'm looking at Jet magazine, and they have Johnny Cochran's face on the cover with his birth year and death year. And I'm looking, it was like, I think he died in 2005. I'm looking at that like, what? I just talked to him. I just met him. And now they're talking about he died. And as it turns out, he probably, at the time I met him, was sick. And either he didn't know it, or he knew it and was going on about his life, or whatever. So, in the CNN piece, I'll end with that, and then I'll go into 7 o'clock. This is CNN. For the Sean Spicer story I read from the New York Times. It was an oddly familiar O.J. Simpson that for a little while filled TV screens across America on Thursday. A Nevada parole board decided Simpson should be freed after the former NFL star apologized for his role in a 2007 armed robbery, said he'd been a model prisoner, and promised that he'd have no conflicts if released. Now, if he's smart, he won't. Now, that's me. That's not them. Simpson's appearance before the board garnered wall-to-wall coverage from cable news shows, coverage that recalled the, quote, trial of the century, unquote, and the many months more than 20 years ago when he transfixed a nation. Quote, I've done my time, Simpson said, unquote. I've done it as well and as respectfully as I think anyone can. Oh, so Simpson is 70. Now 70. Simpson's energy seemed little affected by his time behind bars. He was alert, engaged, and quick to smile, even let out a hearty laugh when parole board chairman Connie Bisbee accidentally said he was aged 90. Quote, I feel like it, quote, he said. I'm sure he does. Simpson has served 9 years of a 9 to 33-year sentence for an armed robbery and kidnapping in Las Vegas. He is expected to be released as early as October and said he plans to move to his home in Florida. An entire generation of Americans has come of age since Simpson seemed an almost inescapable public figure. But for one afternoon, it felt like 1995 again. That was the year he was acquitted of murder charges in the grisly slayings of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. Thursday's parole hearing followed renewed interest in his story, which was explored last year in the award-winning documentary O.J. Made in America and the FX true crime drama The People vs. O.J. Simpson. Though it's been 22 years since the not guilty verdict, the murder trial's themes of criminal justice and race, trust in police, celebrity, and domestic violence remain remarkably resonant in modern culture. Quote, we talk about OJ as though the story is OJ, unquote, journalist Celia Farber says toward the end of the Made in America documentary. The story is OJ and us. I'm going to stop there because I want to get into my next segment, but those two events, because, okay, this was my thinking. Whenever I first saw the news about OJ receiving parole, the first thought that ran across my mind was, well, if Donald Trump can get elected president of the United States, O.J. Simpson can be paroled. That was my initial reaction. I still say that. I believe O.J. killed those people back there at the time, the two that were mentioned. I believe Johnny Cochran did some wonderful work to defend him and ultimately have him acquitted. O.J. then went around and did that nonsense with the burglary and kidnapping. And now it's another segment. My hope and prayer for him is, as a 70-year-old man who's gone through what he's gone through, up and down, in and out, he will live the rest of his life in peace.